Good morning. So this presentation, and this started years ago. We developed this presentation, and it's titled "The Big Picture," which is really so inadequately titled. It's really it's something I created for myself a long time ago. That's really about decision making, and it's very pertinent for now when we're talking about process and focusing more on process than on goals, or kind of end game. And so it's really about the theory of decision making, if you will, and kind of something that I've used in business and in life to kind of push along the decision making process. I've always been a student of decision making. I watch foreign movies, I watch horror movies because they're always about somebody making a bad decision and then it leads to something horrible happening. You can go back to the Friday the 13th movies. Always a couple sneaks off and they're like, oh no, we shouldn't be doing this, and then they end up with like a knife coming through their chest or something. But I love, and there's a commercial now, I think it's Geico, the one where they're like, no, don't run for the car. Let's run to the shed where all the tools are hanging, and they're hiding behind the chainsaw, and the guy's like sitting back there. So it's that theory of like decision making that leads to consequence that I think is really great. And so, as I walk through the presentation, I want you to think about things in these terms. In this world, there's no right or wrong answer. So when you make decisions, there's no yes, that was a right decision, no, that's a wrong decision. There's only favorable and unfavorable outcomes. So as we look at decision making, there's no right, there's no wrong. There's only an outcome that's favorable or an outcome that's unfavorable. And so if you think in terms of unfavorable and favorable outcomes, then it's really more about the decision-making process and less on, oh my God, I can't be wrong, or I need to be right in what I'm trying to decide. It's more about, have I used all the available resources? Have I thought this through and how it impacts everybody that could potentially be impacted by the decision I'm about to make? Have I consulted experts? Have I thought about the risk and reward of the decision? And so if it becomes more of a process where you're analyzing the situation in the environment and then making the decision, and then look, the decision either has a favorable outcome or it has an unfavorable outcome. And then it's about managing the unfavorable outcomes, right? If you think about it, if the outcome is favorable, you don't really have to manage it, right? If things turn out as you had hoped, there's not a lot of extra time to make things right. If it's an unfavorable outcome, then you kind of have to manage the fallout of that decision and then move forward. And so, if you focus on creating a high probability of favorable outcomes, that's really the goal, right? You know that in decision making, as you go throughout your day in life and business, you're never going to have 100% favorable outcomes. You're going to make decisions that, even with the most thought through decision, you've consulted experts, you've looked at all the resources, you've made the decision 100 times before. It doesn't mean that there can't be a favorable or that there will be an unfavorable outcome. The Seattle Seahawks is a perfect example, right? They thought that was the perfect play to run on the goal line. They ran it 100 times in practice. They knew that New England had suffered that play, and yet unfavorable outcome for sure, right? If you're Seattle, you've second guessing that decision. But when you're looking at creating unfavorable versus favorable outcomes, it's more about how do I have a really great process so I'm putting myself in a position to create a lot more favorable outcomes than unfavorable outcomes. Because we already discussed, if you're creating unfavorable outcomes, then it takes a lot of time to fix or resolve those situations that now you've created by creating an unfavorable outcome. The more favorable outcomes you can make, it gives you time then to make more decisions and kind of blossom and do different things with your time. High percent of unfavorable outcomes are usually from a lack of understanding all of the elements. It's not using all the available resources. We do it all the time. We oftentimes, Dave and I and Greg and Andy are always like, well, why didn't they ask us? We've got this right here. And it's not that you don't want to. It's just in the course of being busy, people make a decision or they don't, they're like, oh yeah, I guess I could have consulted this person. And so this process is really about slowing down a bit and thinking through, like, have I, consulted everybody that might be able to assist in this process? Have I looked at all, have I done some research to see if there's been other decisions made that can help me with this? Lack of experience. It's really about spending enough time on the front end to not have to spend a lot of time managing the unfavorable outcomes. When you focus on outcomes, if you focus more on, okay, I'm gonna try and have a great process, so I'm creating a lot of favorable outcomes and less unfavorable outcomes, it makes the decision-making process less stressful, right? If it's all about being right or wrong, there's a lot of stress with that. If it's more about the process of the decision-making, then it's like, look, I know I'm going to have unfavorable outcomes. It's going to happen, so then when it happens, I'm not crushed. I'm not like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And so, it takes the focus off of being right or wrong. It eliminates, the potential trap of avoiding decisions. You see it a lot in, kind of mid-level managers where, they're afraid to make a decision because, then, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. My boss is mad. And so, if it's all about the outcome being favorable or unfavorable, it takes that pressure off of, and less likely then to avoid decision making. If you know that there's going to be some favorable and some unfavorable, less likely to stress or add pressure to the impact. Risk reward, huge piece of decision making, right? All the time, whether it's life or business, you're thinking about, what is the risk, what is the reward of what you're doing. It's simple as in life, my wife asked me to do the dishes, right? So the risk of me saying, no, I'm not doing the dishes is, it's probably a bad night for me, right? The reward of that is, maybe we have a great weekend and she's excited and happy I did the dishes. So, there's that risk reward of each situation. It's the same in business too, as it is in life. And so you should always think about the risk reward. And with risk and reward, there's short-term risk and there's long-term risk, and the same with rewards. Short-term risk is something that's fairly immediate. So, you're risking something that's going to happen right then, right? Vegas, we're in Vegas. Very short-term risk reward, right? You roll the dice, they scoop your money, it's gone, the impact happens immediately. So very short term. Same with the rewards, right? I roll the dice, I win, they pay me. So the rewards and risks are very short term. Long term would be, the decision to create an Ebola czar, right? And so, the risk of that is that, it doesn't work out and Ebola spreads across the globe. The reward of that probably won't be seen for years as, potentially Ebola slows down and doesn't, spread. And so that's the short-term, long-term. And it's important, it's really important to recognize whether the reward is short-term or long-term, and the same is the risk short-term or long-term. And I'll talk about why that's important in a minute. And then I think, who and what will be impacted. I think the other thing that you want to look at when you're thinking about, so if we've determined that in a decision-making process, what's most important is that we create a process where we're creating favorable and unfavorable outcomes. Well, the next step in that is, what does a favorable outcome look like? What does an unfavorable outcome look like? Again, Vegas. I put money down on the pass line in craps. If I roll a 7, the outcome is I win, right? If I roll, craps, I lose. So I know it's very concrete what the favorable outcome is versus the unfavorable. Oftentimes, the favorable outcome is not always as clear as rolling the dice in a craps game. And so, it's important to define what that is. What does the most favorable outcome look like? What does the least favorable outcome look like? And what does an unfavorable outcome look like? And that's, because oftentimes it's somewhat gray, right? It's not always as clear as if this, then that. And so it's very important to determine what that looks like. And then what does the middle look like, right? The least favorable is this, the most favorable is here. The middle is usually what happens, right? I mean, that's most of the time. The sky, it's like, all right, the worst thing that can happen is the sky falls, right? usually the sky doesn't fall. The best thing that can happen is I win the lottery and we all go home. That usually doesn't happen either. It's usually something in the middle. And so that's, what does that middle look like? And so then one of the questions is, can you survive the most unfavorable outcome? If the most unfavorable outcome is the sky falls, we don't survive, right? So that's important to think through when you're making a decision, right? If I'm in a position and I know that the most unfavorable outcome is Santiago comes and says, Kelly, give me your keys, your laptop password, it's over. That's a decision that I have to know, wow, this is the most favorable outcome here could be costly. What does the most favorable outcome look like? I get a 10-cent raise. So probably not going to put my job on the line for a 10-cent raise. So there's it's weighing, what does the most unfavorable outcome look like versus the most favorable and what's in the middle. And thinking about what if you can survive the most unfavorable. Well-calibrated confidence is really a fancy term for what's the likelihood that you're going to have a favorable outcome. Again, the sky falling, it's probably very, very, very minute chance of that happening. Me winning the lottery, I don't play the lottery, so it's probably really unlikely that I'm going to win the lottery. So, but yeah, well-calibrated confidence is what is the likelihood that it's going to be a favorable situation. And some of the things that play into that is how much experience do I have? Have I had a track record of making similar decisions? All of that, the more we make a decision that's very similar, right, we get confidence that we're going to make the decision that's going to have a favorable outcome. Do I understand the dynamics, the environment? Correctly anticipated regret, another very fancy probability term for how is this going to impact me, right? If I go play craps, I just put my kid's college fund on the line, I roll the dice, afterwards, I'm crying in a bar somewhere. So like how is the impact going to affect me, right? If the sky falls, I probably am not here, so the impact is, I'm not here. If you know yourself, and you know that if I make this decision and the outcome is unfavorable, how do I react? Am I fine with that? Am I like, yeah, this isn't a big deal. I've made a lot of unfavorable outcomes, and I'll make more. And so you move on. Then it's not going to shake your confidence, so to speak, is really what that means. Risk is equal dose probabilities and consequences. It's really looking at, what are the probabilities that I'm going to have a favorable outcome, and then what do the consequences look like of both favorable and unfavorable. Before making decisions, ensure you have realistically assessed your probability of creating good decisions. Pascal's wager is it's a famous probability. In fact, it's a great quick story. Pascal was a famous French philosopher a long time ago, and he was a mathematician. And he was looked at as a groundbreaking probability individual in that he came up with this theory that any rational person would believe in a higher power, a God, right? Because he thought, well, if any rational person knew that if you go through your life not creating sin, whatever sin is, we're in Vegas, but whatever sin is, if you go through your life without creating sin, you're not really giving up that much, right? You're giving up a little bit of maybe additional pleasures in some way. And the reward is potentially an infinity of happiness, right? And so the probability was, well, all right, well, I would be foolish not to, give up what's considered finite or very small. I know what I'm giving up, right? It's finite for this potential huge outcome of I could be infinitely happy in some future life. And so it was, at the time, it was like this groundbreaking, probability. And I guess that what's really to take out of that is that, sometimes you can give up very little to potentially get this huge thing. And that's kind of what, life and business is about, finding these opportunities where your risk is very small and there's potentially big reward. Or, the probability of, probability could be that, you're potentially right, or you potentially have a favorable outcome, and it creates this huge win for you. Versus if you're creating an unfavorable outcome, it's a very small something that you're giving up. In making decisions under conditions of uncertainty, the consequences must dominate. So what that means is Like if it's very uncertain and I'm not sure, I haven't made this decision before, there really are no experts to consult, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, then the consequences should far outweigh the probability of you creating a favorable or unfavorable. And all that means is if you don't really know what you're doing, the consequences could be severe, and so you should err on the side of being more cautious if you really are unsure of the decision you're going to make. So I did this for years. I don't do this anymore, but I used to keep a log, and this started, I used to trade stocks pretty heavily, and I used to go to trading workshops, and literally they would be these trading schools would be, days of like hardcore like discipline on process, and so I used to, they used to preach, decision making and keeping good logs of what you're doing, and so I used to keep a log of, literally I would write down decisions that I would make, and I would write what's the most favorable outcome, what's the most unfavorable, and then what's the middle outcome look like. These are some examples. Aggressively pursue a 4% rate increase at ABC company. The most favorable is I achieve a 4% increase, right? The most unfavorable is I lose the business, right? The client's like, yes, I'm going to go somewhere else. The middle, which is most probable, is the client negotiates with me, right? Well, I can't give you 4%, I can give you 2%. So that's what the middle looks like. Now, when I go make that decision, now I know what the most favorable outcome is. I get a 4%. What does that mean to me? Is that great? And then the most unfavorable is I lose the business. So if I'm having a great year and I can potentially afford, the loss of this client, maybe the margin's not good or it's very good, I think plays into that. But now I know exactly what the most favorable, the most unfavorable, in the middle looks like. And small ones, disciplined site supervisor at XYZ Corporation. Most favorable, the performance improves. The most unfavorable, the supervisor quits. Well, if he's not that good, maybe you're not giving up, you're giving up very little to gain a lot. The middle is no improvement, and he probably ends up termed. So, that's kind of how the log works. You have to discipline yourself to do it. Obviously, you make tons of decisions throughout the day, so you can't be like, all right, should I go to the bathroom now or wait 10 minutes? Like, I wouldn't recommend writing that down. But things that where there's true consequence, I think if you keep a log, decision making is no different than riding a bike or anything else. The more you do it, the better you get. The more decisions you make, the better you get at it. The more you focus on the process of decision making, the better you get at it. And so this is why I've kind of made myself a student of this. I won't spend, so the drawdown is a stock term. It's used in trading. But the drawdown, what drawdown means is, in life and in business, there will always be a string of most unfavorable outcomes, right? It's like when it rains, it pours. It's when one bad thing happens, usually there's two more behind it, right? And so it's true in the trading world as well. And so when I create a trading system, I have to, so if I know that I put this system in place that over a period of 5 years, it's going to net me 10% or 15% return, right? So I know that if I follow this very discipline-like, I'm going to potentially get in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% returns. Well, what happens with the system is, over 5 years, there's going to be peaks and valleys, right? It's going to go up, it's going to go down, and at the end of it, it's probably going to land on 10 to 15% net result. Well, if at any time I can't survive the drawdown, if my account has $20,000 in it, and over 5 years it's going to gain 10 to 15% of that, but if any period along that 5-year time frame, it goes down and my account goes to zero, I'm out of the game, right? I didn't survive the drawdown. It's great that after 5 years you're going to be up 10 or 15%, but if you don't make the 5 years, it doesn't really matter, right? So you have to be able to survive the drawdown. A drawdown is really a string of unfavorable outcomes. And so, and what that means in life, because I'm assuming most of you probably aren't trading stocks regularly, but what that means in life and business is you have to be able to make enough make enough decisions where there's an unfavorable outcome 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row to be able to survive that. We see it all the time with clients, right? We have a client site where we're like, oh my God, Shane is going to be the best officer you've ever seen. And Shane comes and he's terrible, right? And we're like, then we go back and we're like, oh, wait till you see Kevin. He is amazing. And Kevin's not good. Well, how many of those can I survive before the client's like, Kelly has no idea what he's talking about. We got to go somewhere else. So then, that's surviving the drawdown. Other examples, and probably more realistic examples, are what happens to managers, even executives. They make a few decisions that lead to unfavorable outcomes. What happens? Then they're like, oh my, they try that much harder, right? Oh my God, I gotta get this right this time. And then it snowballs, because the more you put the pressure on yourself, you're making then probably rash decisions or decisions that aren't being well thought out. And so that leads to not surviving the drawdown, and the manager ends up leaving or losing his job. And so that's really what drawdown is. You need to survive a stretch of bad fortune. And and kind of what we talked about, decisions, as you make decisions that lead to favorable outcomes, you're more likely to make favorable outcomes because you get more confidence, and then as you get more experienced at decision making, your decisions are going to be better. And so it's the when it rains, it pours in reverse. The more I get comfortable making decisions, I'm confident, and that leads to better decision making and better outcomes. And this is you can't achieve huge success living in the middle. Now, that doesn't mean living in the middle is not a great place to live, right? If you picture a giant highway, right? This is this giant highway of life. And when I'm in the right lane, I'm going slow, right? Not a bad life. I mean, I'm not going to, I'm not like giant smile on my face cruising down the road. This is fantastic. I'm living this nice, slow life, right? Nothing wrong with that. I move over to the middle where most people live, a little bit to the middle or to the right, and every now and again I feel frisky and I move a little bit farther left, and that's what life's about, right? Nothing wrong with that. What happens? People that live in the left lane usually run really fast and go off the road. That's kind of how that highway of life works. And really about maximizing is, staying in the right lane, and then, all right, there's nobody in the other lane, so I move over and I ride the left lane for a while, and then I'm like, all right, it's getting dark out, snow's coming, I move back over. And that's kind of what life's about, is finding the appropriate times to ride in the left-hand lane and take more chances, and then when it's appropriate, you get back in the right lane. But you never achieve huge success living in the middle, but a lot of people are happy not getting huge success, right? If you want to achieve huge success, usually you have to drive in the left lane, for at least periods of time. So there's a theory that in life you have to give to get, right? And especially business, everything's kind of this give and take. And I think when you think about it happens all day long and you don't think about it, right? You give this, you get that, and it's kind of this, we jump in a taxi and we give the guy $1 because he raised his hand and blew a whistle and the taxi came. It's a give and take, right? I don't have to run out to the street and wave my arm. He blows his whistle, cab comes up, I give him $1, I get in. Give and get, or give and take, and that's kind of how life works. And so, you want to get what propels you forward in life and give what doesn't propel you backwards. That's extremely important. Of this whole presentation, that's probably one of the most important sentences in the presentation. Most people that fail in life and in business get stuff that really isn't that important to them, and they give up stuff that's drastically important, and they don't realize it. Now, it happens all the time. I give up stuff all the time that is important, and I didn't get something back in return that's important enough. It happens. It's going to happen to everybody. But it's recognizing when it does happen, so you minimize the times that it does. And then that you maximize the times where you're getting something of huge value to you, and you're not giving up that much. The dishes, right? My wife says, hey, can you do the dishes? It's not really giving up that much. I mean, I guess if we haven't done them in a month and they're like piled up to the ceiling, maybe it's different. But if I do the dishes, I'm not really giving up that much, right? And, it's not propelling me backwards. I lose 10 minutes of my life, right? I could have, watched sports or something. And so, but what I get is potentially a happy wife, or, she's like, oh, that was cool, he did the dishes. And so, that's kind of a scenario. And so, but that's, and in business, it happens all the time, right? Clients are this, can you remove that person? Pick up the phone, angry about this, and oh, don't worry, I'm driving out there right now. You're giving up something, right? You're jumping in your car and driving out to the client site. You could have been doing, you could have been doing your unbilled reports. You could have been doing a lot of other things. So you're giving something up. What do you get in return? Potentially a client that's like, oh, that's cool. Kelly jumped in his car and drove right over. And so I get that. If that's really important to that client, you got something big. All I did was give up that, now I got to do my unbilled report during Sports Center at night instead. So, it's thinking through give and take in that regards. Because, life is about trading wins. And back to, kind of the short-term risk versus the long-term, it's the same in give and take. Sometimes I give up something, in the short term to potentially get something in the long term. And what's really important about that is usually if you are able to give up something in the short term, it leads to something bigger in the long term. So it's important to know that if I can give up something in the short term that's important to somebody at that time, usually the reward is bigger for me. What I get in return is usually big if I'm willing to wait for it. And that's just how life and business works. Kind of the client, right? I jump in my car, so immediately the client gets something. He gets me immediately jumping in my car and driving to a site. The long term is I get a happy client that's like knows that Kelly will be there for me, and then when I need something or a rate increase time or they go out to bid and it's a bid process that I feel more comfortable now because the client knows that I'm the type of person that will jump in my car and drive to the site. So that's really trading short-term wins versus long-term. Long-term wins are usually worth more. People are inherently more willing to give up short-term. People are more willing to give up the long-term because they want immediate results, right? Most people are, oh yeah, I'll spend my college or my kid's college money today at the craps table because he's not going to college for 10 years. It'll be fine. I'll win the lottery. And so, it's that people usually are okay to give up long-term because it's down the road, right? I'm like, that's down the road. I'll figure it out by then. And so, that short-term becomes a lot more important to them. And, and ultimately it's about creating win-win situations. Don't take away from give and take that it's about, you kind of getting the better of somebody. That's not really what it's about. It's everyone's needs are different, right? The client's need is he wants to feel like I'm the person that will jump in my car and run out to a site. That's a win for him. It's a win for me too because, like I said, I gain long-term value in that client appreciates me in a way that I think will be beneficial to me in the long run. So it's not somebody took advantage of somebody. It's a win for the client. He gets what he wants. It's a win for me potentially because I get what I want. Dishes, same thing. Not really a win because I did the dishes, but I'm going to get a happy wife for the weekend. So, and she gets to say, wow, she tells her friend, my husband actually just got up and did the dishes. And so, there's win-win. So it's really about creating win-win situations, not about one person like taking advantage of somebody. End game. You've got this process where, we've thought through our decision making, we've analyzed risk reward, we've really thought about what the most favorable outcome looks like, the most unfavorable outcome. The last piece of this is end game. And an end game becomes very important, and we talk about it, and end game really becomes very important the higher up in business you go, for sure. But I think it's very important in life as well. But there's everything that you do should be focused on an end game. And when I say end game, and it may be end game, and end game always has this negative connotation kind of, but end game really is, it's that I want to make sure that what I'm getting is something that's important, that my end game is to get here. So as I go through life and business, and you see it a lot, even at the president meetings, where I'll see presidents, fight for something, and Santiago and the president are going back and forth, and I'm sitting there thinking, what are they trying to get? Like, I don't understand. And so if they don't have an end game, then what? Santiago's angry because and the president doesn't get what they want, and it becomes this furious battle of and somebody wasn't focused on an end game, so it didn't go anywhere. And it happens, I get vice presidents that will call, and they're like, oh God, I can't believe Cynthia did this, and this is crazy. Can you believe? And I just and I wanted, whoa, do you want something? And it's like, oh, no, I just wanted to complain. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, if that's what you want, if your end game is to complain, I'm good at listening. Can I do some other things while I listen? But that's true, and that happens all the time where somebody's like, oh, I can't believe, and why does Dave send us all these emails? And do you want, now, that's why I love the start, stop, continue thing, because you're actually, what do you want? Well, we want to stop this. And then, Dave gets up and says, Brandon, what do you really want? Like, let me make sure I understand what your end game is here. And that's why that's important, is to know what your end game is. And we talk about it, we don't call it end game, but, Dave and Andy and Greg and I always talk, like, what do you really want? What are we trying to get out of this? So, because if you know what you're trying to get long term, then you can structure your kind of navigating to get there in a way that makes most sense. Probably, if you don't want to keep a decision-making log, start writing down end game. It's a first step to improving decision-making. The most favorable, most unfavorable, middle, that's time-consuming. I promise you it will improve your decision-making, but that's a big commitment to make. Writing down end game is not that big of a commitment. So if you want to take baby steps towards better decision-making, do this. Because writing down an end game will force you to, and I used to write them down, and then I would go back at the end of the day, and I would read them. What was my end game for today, for tomorrow, for long term? What am I trying to get out of this? I used to go to president meetings, and I would have end games. I used to, before smartphones, I remember I used to, when I was a vice president working in the Northern California region, I worked for Terry Brady, and I used to carry around a wadded up piece of paper in my pocket that always had all these end games. And I would try to catch Terry when he was in a certain mood. When he just golfed a great game, I'd pull out my list and I'd be like, Terry, what do you think about this? He'd be like, oh yeah, it's great, thank you. And I'd run. And that was, and I had those end games always prepared. And so I did, I still do that when I go to president meetings. And sometimes I don't get to, if I see Santiago's not in the mood, I keep it in my pocket, or I keep it on my smartphone. I try to figure out where Bill or Rocco is on any given day so I can pull out my end games. I think that's super important. That will really help your decision making if you're always trying to posture towards something. But an end game can't be this novel or a paragraph. It's really a couple of sentences. It truly is this is what I'm trying to get. And then, so when I used to write them all down, I'd go back and I'd put a W or an L, which was my own. I don't recommend that because it's not really how it should be done. It's not really a win or a loss. I used to play around with sports, and so, to me, everything's win and loss, but which flies totally against everything I've talked about today, so don't listen to any of that. But find a way to I've known people that letter grade their end games, A, B, C, D. Some people circle them and put an X through the ones or a line through the ones that didn't happen their way. Whatever you do, but it's important to go back and keep a log of did it happen and why, because then you can go back and understand why or why not, right? Oh, my timing wasn't right. I caught Santiago on just the wrong day. Next time I'll be better about approaching him at the right time. So that's where that's important, to make sure that you keep a log of where it worked out and where it didn't. And then I tell you, don't get bogged down with wins and losses. But so again, that was my own personal way of grading it. But there's better ways of doing that. So big picture is about a lot of things, and I think that it's kind of mistitled. It's really about decision making. Decision theory is probably a way to explain it. But ultimately, making educated decisions, using experience and potential resources to make decisions. Keeping a decision making log. Figuring out the most unfavorable, the most favorable. No, that's kind of what big picture is. It's the give and take mentality. It's thinking about short term versus long term. I mean, these are all things that are very important. I think about where it's crazy to think I've been a president now 8-9 years, which is really crazy. But and I think about all the things that I wanted to do to get myself to a level that I wanted to be at. And it's really this, like decision-making to me is the most vital, I mean, it's so important. And you can think back in life, right? There's those few decisions that you make that, really kind of turn your life one way or another. And business is the same way, and career is the same way. And so, and a lot of people that think that it's all chance, right? It's like, oh, well, Kelly got a lucky break. He did, of course, it worked out for him. And it's not, it's like this is the diligent behind the scenes stuff that, people that are successful, I think, really religiously try to be disciplined to a decision-making process that enables them to make decisions that work out for them. And then, again, one of the most important is having that focused or defined end game, I think is really critical for sure.